in the heart of the crystalline spire city of Valara, where gravity hummed through glass towers and the air shimmered with the breath of ancient atmospheric engines, reigned Queen Zyra of the Selenari, a being of such luminous beauty and terrifying power that even the boldest among her kind dared not meet her gaze for longer than a heartbeat. Her skin, pale as moonstone polished by eons of starlight, glowed faintly in the low light of the palace chambers, and her hair, long and silken as spun nebulae, fell in waves of pure white that seemed to ripple with unseen energy. She was not merely queen. She was myth made flesh, a living conduit of the Selenari's ancestral flame, a force of nature wrapped in humanoid grace. And yet, for all her majesty, she was alone, not by decree, but by fear. For generations, the Selenari had whispered of the curse of the twin sons, a prophecy that foretold any male who drew too near the queen would be consumed by the very heat of her presence, his essence unraveling like thread in flame. It was said her aura burned with the intensity of a dying star, too vast, too hot, too much for mortal frames to endure. Suitors from the noble houses of the Seven Rings had tried, warlords armored in quantum weave, poets who sang in harmonic resonance, scholars who'd memorized every gene sequence of her bloodline, but each had faltered at the threshold of her solarium, collapsing into ash or madness before they could utter a vow. The throne room grew colder with each failure, and Zyra's heart, once open as a summer sky, hardened into something distant and glacial. She ruled with flawless precision, her voice never raised, her judgments never questioned, yet her eyes, pale silver, like twin mirrors of a dead moon, betrayed a loneliness so profound it ached in the silence between her commands. Then came the human. His name was Joran Vale, and he arrived not in a gilded skiff draped in ceremonial silks, but crammed into the cargo hold of a battered freighter called the Dust Mite, stowing away after his mining colony on the ice moons of Kara was obliterated in a corporate skirmish. He was lean but wiry, sunburnt from a dozen different stars, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a mouth that always seemed on the verge of either a joke or a curse. He hadn't come to court the queen. He hadn't even known she existed until the Selenari Border Patrol dragged him before the High Tribunal for trespassing in restricted space. By rights, he should have been vaporized on the spot, but protocol demanded that all sentient beings be granted audience before execution. And so, by a twist of bureaucratic fate, Joran found himself standing, shaking, sweaty, and utterly bewildered, in the grand hall of the Obsidian Spire, facing the most feared sovereign in the quadrant. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in a swirl of bioluminescent mist, its floor a single sheet of black crystal that reflected the stars above as if the room floated in space. Courtiers in flowing robes of liquid silver stood frozen like statues, their white skin gleaming, their white hair coiled in intricate braids that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence. At the far end, upon a throne carved from a single meteorite embedded with veins of living light, sat Queen Zyra. She did not move. She did not speak. But the air around her warped, bending like heat haze over desert stone. Joran felt it immediately. A pressure in his chest, a dryness in his throat, as if the very oxygen were being scorched from his lungs. His skin prickled. Sweat beaded and evaporated instantly. He swayed on his feet, vision swimming. "Kneel, off-worlder," intoned the Chancellor, his voice echoing like stone on stone. "Or be unmade." Joran tried to speak, but his tongue felt like leather. He blinked, trying to clear the haze, and in that moment, his eyes met hers. Not out of courage, more out of sheer, dumbfounded curiosity. And what he saw stopped him cold. Not fury, not judgment, but something raw and flickering, hope, buried so deep it was almost invisible. It was the look of someone who'd stopped expecting kindness so long ago that she no longer recognized it when it appeared. He didn't kneel. Instead, he took a step forward. Gasps rippled through the court. The Chancellor raised a hand, ready to summon the disintegration field. But Zyra lifted a single finger, pale, elegant, trembling ever so slightly, and the room fell silent. Joran kept walking. Each step was agony. The heat intensified not like fire, but like standing too close to a reactor core. Radiant, invisible, relentless. His shirt smoked at the edges. His boots left faint scorch marks on the crystal floor. But he didn't stop. He wasn't thinking of glory or survival. He was thinking of his sister, lost in the colony blast, and how she'd always said he had the thickest skull in the system. Maybe that was it. Maybe humans were just dense enough. When he reached the foot of the dais, he stopped, swaying like a sapling in a gale. He looked up at her, really looked, and said the first thing that came to mind, "You look like you could use a drink." Silence. Then laughter. Not from him, from her. A sound so rare, so unexpected, that several courtiers actually stumbled backward. It was soft at first, then richer, deeper, like wind chimes in a storm. Zaira covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes wide, tears glistening like liquid mercury at the corners. She hadn't laughed in decades. You are not burning," she whispered, her voice like ice cracking over a warm river. "Yeah, well," Joran rasped, wiping his brow with a sleeve that came away charred. "I've been called a lot of things. Flammable ain't one of them." That moment changed everything. The court erupted in chaos. Some demanded Joran's immediate execution for insolence. Others whispered that the prophecy had been broken, that the human was the key to ending the queen's isolation. Zaira silenced them all with a single command: "He stays." And so began the strangest alliance in galactic history. Joran was given quarters in the palace, though quarters was generous. It was more like a gilded cell with views of the nebula-strewn sky. He was assigned tutors to teach him Selenari customs, language, and etiquette, but he mostly ignored them, preferring to wander the palace gardens where gravity-defying flora bloomed in colors that didn't exist in human spectrum. He talked to the palace drones, fixed broken atmospheric regulators with scrap from his pocket, and once, during a formal banquet, accidentally insulted the ambassador of the Third Ring by mistaking his ceremonial headdress for a hat rack. Yet through it all, Zaira watched him, not with suspicion, but with something akin to wonder. She began summoning him to her solarium in the evenings, a chamber where the twin suns of Velara poured through prismatic windows, casting rainbows across walls lined with ancient data crystals. There, she would ask him questions about Earth, about human emotions, about why people cried at happy endings. He answered honestly, sometimes crudely, often with a joke that made her laugh until her ribs ached. In return, she told him of her people's history, their fall from the stars, their pact with the cosmic flame, the weight of being both ruler and relic. He learned that her heat wasn't a curse, but a side effect of her connection to the core, a sentient energy source buried deep beneath the palace that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The closer one got to her, the more the core's energy reacted, overwhelming non-Selenari biology. But Joran didn't react. His body simply absorbed it like dry earth soaking up rain. Scientists ran tests. They found his cells contained trace elements of an unknown isotope, likely from the mining accident that destroyed his colony. It acted as a natural dampener, neutralizing the core's resonance. He wasn't immune. He was compatible. This revelation sent shockwaves through the court. Whispers turned to plots. The traditionalists saw Joran as an abomination, a contaminant in their pure lineage. The reformists saw him as salvation, a bridge to a new era. And then there were those who saw only opportunity. One night, as Joran walked back from the hydroponic orchard, where he'd been teaching the gardeners how to graft citrus onto anti-grav vines, he was ambushed. 3 figures in shadow-weave armor lunged from an alcove, energy blades humming to life. He barely dodged the first strike, rolling behind a statue of the first queen. He had no weapons, no training, but he had street smarts and desperation. He grabbed a fallen fruit, a spiky, phosphorescent orb, and hurled it into the face of his nearest attacker. The fruit exploded in a cloud of sticky, blinding pollen. In the confusion, he sprinted down a service corridor, alarms blaring behind him. He didn't stop until he reached the solarium. Zaira was there, standing by the window, her silhouette outlined in starlight. She turned as he burst in, breathless and bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm. "They tried to kill me," he panted. "I know," she said quietly. "I felt the disturbance in the core. It recoiled, in fear." He stared at her. "You felt it. The core is tied to me, and now, it knows you." She stepped closer, her heat washing over him like a warm tide. "They will not stop. The House of Vor has declared you a threat to the sanctity of the throne." "Great. So what now? You toss me out an airlock to keep the peace." "No," her voice hardened. "I protect what is mine." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Joran's heart hammered. Not from the heat, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. The next morning, Zaira announced a royal decree. Joran Vale would be granted provisional citizenship of the Selenari Concord, and would serve as her personal liaison to off-world species. It was unprecedented. Outrage spread like wildfire. Protests erupted in the lower spires. But Zaira stood firm, her presence radiating authority that even her critics couldn't ignore. Yet danger simmered beneath the surface. The House of Vor, led by the cold-eyed Lord Kalen, began amassing support among the military castes. They claimed the queen had been bewitched, her judgment clouded by alien influence. Secret messages flew between warships. Weapons were stockpiled. And then came the sabotage. First, the atmospheric stabilizers failed in the eastern wing, flooding the corridors with toxic gas. Then, the food synthesizers began producing neurotoxins. Each incident was subtle, deniable, but Joran recognized the pattern. Someone was testing the palace's defenses, probing for weakness. He warned Zyra, but she was reluctant to accuse her own nobles without proof. To move against Kalen without evidence is to invite civil war, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Then let's get evidence, Joran replied. That night they hatched a plan. Using Joran's knowledge of human deception tactics and Zyra's access to the palace's neural network, they set a trap. Joran would pretend to accept a secret meeting with a disgruntled officer who claimed to have intel on the plotters. The meeting would take place in the old reactor chamber, a decommissioned sector deep in the palace's underbelly, shielded from surveillance. It was a risk, but Joran had learned something in his weeks at court. Sometimes, the only way to survive a fire is to walk straight through it. The chamber was dark, lit only by the faint glow of dormant conduits. Joran stood alone, hands in his pockets, whistling a tune from his childhood. Footsteps echoed. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Lord Kalen himself, flanked by 4 armored enforcers. Impressive? Kalen sneered, his white hair braided with obsidian beads. The primitive actually showed up. Yeah. Well, Joran said, grinning despite the fear coiling in his gut. I've got a soft spot for dramatic villains. Kalen's eyes narrowed. You think this is a game? You, a hairless ape with no lineage, no power, no right to breathe our air. You dare stand beside our queen. I don't stand beside her, Joran said, voice low. I stand for her, and that's more than you'll ever do. Kalen's hand shot out, gripping Joran's throat. You will die screaming, human, and she will watch. But before he could squeeze, the lights flared to life. From the gantries above, Selenari royal guards descended, weapons trained. And standing at the center, radiating fury and heat so intense the air crackled, was Queen Zyra. You will release him, she commanded, her voice resonating with the power of the core itself. Kalen laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Or what? You'll burn me? Go ahead. Become the monster they whisper you are. Zyra's eyes blazed. For a heartbeat, Joran thought she might do it. But then she looked at him, at his bruised face, his defiant stance, and something in her softened. No, she said. I will not become what you fear, but I will expose you. With a gesture, holographic recordings flickered to life around them. Kalen's own encrypted messages, his orders to sabotage the palace, his plans to stage a coup during the upcoming eclipse ceremony. The guards gasped. Even Kalen paled. You cannot prove those are mine, he stammered. They're synced to your biometric signature, Zyra said coldly. And the core itself witnessed your treason. Kalen snarled and lunged. Not at her, but at Joran, drawing a hidden blade. But Joran was ready. He sidestepped, grabbed the alien's wrist, and twisted with all his strength. The blade clattered to the floor. Before Kalen could react, the guards pinned him down. As they dragged him away, Kalen screamed curses, promising vengeance, promising that no human would ever sit on the Selenari throne. Joran watched him go, then turned to Zyra. You okay? She looked exhausted. The glow around her dimmed. I am tired of being feared. He stepped closer, ignoring the heat that still prickled his skin. Then let people see you, not just the queen. You. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance between them. Only understanding, and something deeper, something neither dared name yet. In the days that followed, the palace changed. The air felt lighter. Courtiers began speaking to Joran without flinching. Children peeked from behind pillars, curious about the fireproof human. And Zyra. She walked the halls without her usual retinue, her laughter echoing in corridors that had known only silence for centuries. But peace was fragile. Kalen's arrest had only scattered the rebellion, not destroyed it. Rumors spoke of warships gathering at the edge of the system, of mercenaries hired from the Void clans, of a weapon designed to sever the queen's connection to the core, leaving her mortal and vulnerable. Joran knew they were running out of time. He also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not let them take her. Not while he still drew breath. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, Zyra found him on the palace's highest balcony, staring into the void. "What are you thinking?" she asked, joining him. "That I never thought I'd miss Earth," he said with a wry smile. "But I kinda do. The rain, the smell of wet soil, the way the sky turns orange before a storm." She was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, "Would you go back if you could?" He looked at her, really looked, and shook his head. "Nah. Turns out home isn't a place. It's a person." Her breath caught. The heat around her flared, not in warning, but in warmth, like a hearth welcoming a traveler. And in that moment, beneath the watchful stars of 1,000 worlds, something new began to bloom in the heart of the crystalline spire. A fragile, defiant thing, forged in fire and tempered by courage. It had no name yet, but it had a future, and it would burn brighter than any prophecy. The fragile piece shattered 3 nights later, not with a whisper, but with a scream that tore through the palace like a blade through silk. It came from the core chamber, deep beneath the obsidian spire, where the living heart of the Selenari pulsed in rhythmic harmony with Queen Zyra's soul. Joran was halfway through a dream about orange sunsets and his sister's laugh when the alarm blared, a low, guttural wail that vibrated in his bones. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, boots already laced, knife in hand. By the time he reached the core chamber's antechamber, chaos had taken root. Royal guards lay unconscious, their armor scorched from within. The air reeked of ozone and burnt flesh. And Zyra was on her knees before the core, her white hair writhing as if alive, her hands pressed against the crystalline surface that now pulsed erratically, its light flickering between gold and a sickly, venomous green. "They used a resonance key," she gasped without turning. "Stolen from the Vault of Echoes. Disrupting the bond." Joran knelt beside her. "Can you stop it?" "I'm trying, but it's like trying to hold back a collapsing star with bare hands." Her voice cracked. Sweat beaded on her brow and instantly vaporized. "If the core destabilizes, the entire Spire City will implode. Millions will die." Before he could respond, a shadow detached itself from the far wall. Not Kalen. This figure was taller, leaner, draped in a cloak woven from void fiber that drank the light. The hood fell back, revealing a face that mirrored Zyra's in bone structure but twisted by bitterness. Princess Vela, Zyra's younger sister, presumed dead in the purge of the 7th Spire a decade ago. "You always were too soft, sister," Vela said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. In her hand, she held a slender rod of black metal, the resonance key, humming with stolen energy. "You clung to tradition while our people stagnated. You feared your own power. But I will wield it." "You faked your death," Zyra whispered, betrayal sharpening her tone. "You joined the Void Clans." "I led them," Vela corrected, stepping closer. "And now, with the core severed from you, its power will flow to me. The Selenari need a queen who doesn't cower behind alien pets." Her eyes flicked to Joran, and for the first time he felt true fear. Not of death, but of helplessness. He had no weapon that could touch her. No authority. Just his body, his wits, and the strange, quiet hum in his cells that had saved him before. "You think power is about control," Zyra said, rising unsteadily to her feet. "But the core chooses. It has always chosen me." "Not anymore." Vela twisted the key. The core shrieked. A sound that wasn't sound, but pure psychic agony that sent Joran crashing to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Zyra screamed, clutching her chest as if her ribs were splitting open. The chamber walls began to fracture, veins of darkness spreading like rot through the crystal. But then something unexpected happened. Joran's skin began to glow, not brightly, not dramatically, but with a soft, steady amber light, like embers stirred to life. The resonance key's frequency, it wasn't just disrupting the core. It was amplifying something in him. The isotope from the mining accident, the one that made him immune, was reacting to the chaos, resonating in counterharmony. He didn't understand the science. He only knew one thing: move. With a roar, he lunged. Not at Vela, but at the core itself. He slammed his palms against the crystalline surface, right beside Zyra's hands. The heat was unbearable, like plunging into molten glass, but he held on. And then connection. Images flooded his mind. Stars being born, civilizations rising and falling, Zyra as a child laughing in these very halls, Vela weeping in exile, the core not as a machine, but as a being ancient, grieving, lonely. It had been waiting, not for a ruler, for a partner, and it had found two. Zyra gasped as she felt it too, Joran's presence in the bond, not as an intruder, but as a bridge. His human imperfection, his chaotic warmth, his stubborn refusal to burn. It stabilized the feedback loop. The core's light steadied, shifting from green back to gold, then deepening into a rich, molten bronze, the color of dawn on a new world. Vela snarled, "No, you cannot share what is mine." She raised the key to strike, but Joran twisted, pulling Zyra behind him. The blow meant for the core struck his shoulder instead. Agony exploded through him, but he didn't let go. Instead, he pushed not with muscle, but with will, with the strange energy now flowing through him. The key shattered in Vela's hand, shards embedding in her palm. She shrieked, stumbling back as the backlash seared her arm black. "You've doomed us all," she spat, vanishing into the shadows as the chamber alarms shifted from crisis to containment. Silence fell, heavy and trembling. Zyra turned to Joran, her eyes wide with awe and terror. What are you?" He winced, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Still just a guy who really needs a drink. But they both knew it was more than that. The core had changed. They had changed. The bond was no longer singular, it was a triad. Queen, human, and ancient flame. And somewhere in the void beyond Velara, Vela was regrouping. Her hatred now fused with stolen power and a new, terrifying purpose. Days later, the palace buzzed with rumors. The official story. A rogue faction had attempted sabotage, foiled by royal vigilance. But those who'd seen the core's new bronze glow knew better. Joran was no longer just a liaison. He was the core-bound, the first non-Selenari ever linked to their ancestral heart. Some hailed him as a savior. Others whispered he was a parasite, leeching the queen's divinity. Zyra ignored them all. She spent hours in the solarium with him, not as queen and subject, but as two souls navigating uncharted territory. She taught him to listen to the core's whispers. He taught her to laugh without restraint. They planned reforms, opening trade with human colonies, dismantling the caste system, sharing Selenari technology to heal war-torn worlds. But Vela hadn't vanished. Her followers struck again, this time not with sabotage, but with truth. Holographic broadcasts flooded the public channels, showing footage of Joran's arrival, his unnatural immunity, his growing influence. "The queen is bewitched," the voiceover hissed. "The core is corrupted. Only purity can restore balance." Riots erupted in the lower spires. Temples closed their doors. And then came the ultimatum. A fleet of Void Clan warships, cloaked in dark matter shrouds, appeared at the edge of the system. At their helm, Vela, now calling herself the Scion of Purity, demanding Zyra surrender the abomination or face annihilation. The Royal Council urged surrender. "He is not one of us," the Chancellor argued. "His presence invites war." Zyra stood before them, her white hair braided with threads of bronze light, her eyes blazing. "He is more than one of us. He is the future." That night, Joran found her on the highest balcony, staring at the approaching fleet. "You don't have to do this for me," he said quietly. She turned, placing a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it with you." Below them, the city prepared for war. But in that moment, something else stirred in the core. Not fear, but anticipation. It remembered other wars, other endings, and it knew. This time, the story wouldn't be written in fire alone, but in the quiet courage of a human who walked into heat and didn't burn, and a queen who finally learned to trust. The first shots would be fired at dawn. But the real battle, the one for the soul of a civilization, had only just begun. Dawn came not with light, but with silence, the kind that precedes thunder. The twin suns of Velara rose behind a veil of ionized dust, casting the spire city in hues of blood and bronze. Above, the Void Clan armada hung like a swarm of obsidian wasps, their hulls drinking the starlight, weapons humming to full charge. Below, the streets of Velara emptied as citizens fled to the deep shelters beneath the crystalline towers. Only the royal guard remained on the surface, arrayed along the palace ramparts in gleaming armor, their white hair bound tight, faces set in grim resolve. Joran stood beside Zyra on the central balcony of the obsidian spire, wind tugging at his patched jacket. He wore no armor, just a reinforced vest lined with scavenged shielding plates and a comm unit wired to the palace's tactical grid. At his hip hung not a blade, but a modified resonance emitter, jury-rigged from core fragments and human tech. It pulsed faintly in time with his heartbeat. "You still think we can avoid a full engagement?" he asked, voice low. Zyra's eyes never left the fleet. "Vela doesn't want war. She wants legitimacy. If she destroys Velara, she inherits ashes. She's waiting for me to break, to surrender you or flee. And if you don't, then she'll try to shatter the core from orbit." A resonance pulse tuned to its old frequency. "It would kill me and unravel the city's structural harmonics." Joran exhaled sharply. "So we let her think she's winning." Zyra turned to him then, her silver eyes softening. "You've been planning something." "Maybe." He tapped his temple. "The core's new frequency. It's stable, but it's also adaptable. What if we don't defend it, but invite her in?" Understanding dawned on her face. "A trap woven from truth." "Exactly. Let her beam her signal. Let her think she's severing the bond. But instead of resisting, we sync with it. And when she channels her will through that link, we pull her into the triad." Zyra finished, breath catching. "Mind, soul, and flame. She'll see everything. Our pain, our hope, the core's memory of her as a child, before bitterness took root." "It's risky," Joran admitted. "If she resists, the feedback could fry both our nervous systems. Or worse, merge us permanently." Zyra reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. The heat that once terrified suitors now felt like sunlight on skin. "Then we face it together." Above, the lead warship, the Scourge of Purity, opened fire. Not with plasma or kinetic rounds, but with a beam of pure sonic resonance, invisible and devastating, aimed straight at the heart of the spire. The palace trembled. Cracks spiderwebbed across the crystal dome. Citizens screamed in the lower levels as gravity fluctuated. But in the core chamber, Joran and Zyra stood hand in hand before the pulsing heart of their world. "Now," Zyra whispered. Joran activated the emitter. Instead of blocking the signal, it amplified it, redirecting the pulse directly into the core, not as an attack but as an open channel. The moment the resonance touched the core, the world dissolved. Suddenly, they were not in the chamber, but in a memory. A garden beneath twin moons. Two girls racing through silver ferns, laughing. Vela, small and bright-eyed, placing a crown of glowing blossoms on Zyra's head. "You'll be the best queen ever," she'd said. Then fire, the purge, accusations of treason. Zyra, forced to sign exile orders to save the throne. Vela's eyes turning cold as she was dragged away, whispering, "You chose power over me." Then years in the void. Hunger, betrayal. The slow poison of believing love was weakness. Joran felt it all, the loneliness, the rage, the desperate need to be seen. And he pushed back, not with anger, but with truth. "You were never forgotten." He sent through the bond, his human mind clumsy but sincere. "She wept for you every eclipse. She kept your childhood flute in her private vault. She never stopped hoping you'd come home." Zyra added her voice, raw and trembling. "I was wrong to let fear rule me, but I would give up the throne, the core, my very life, to have my sister back." In the warship above, Vela screamed. The resonance beam faltered. Her crew watched in horror as their commander collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her void fiber cloak smoldering where the bronze light of the core now seeped from her pores. The triad held her, not as a prisoner, but as a lost piece finally returning to the whole. When the vision faded, Joran and Zyra were on the floor of the core chamber, gasping. But the city was intact. The fleet hung motionless. Minutes later, a single shuttle detached from the Scourge and descended toward the palace landing pad. Zyra met her sister at the base of the obsidian spire, not on the throne dais, but on equal ground. Vela stepped out, her armor gone, wearing simple white robes, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I felt it," she whispered. "The core. It never rejected me. I rejected myself." Zyra opened her arms. No words, just embrace. Behind them, Joran leaned against a pillar, watching the first true sunrise Velara had seen in years break over the spires. Golden, gentle, full of promise. In the weeks that followed, the Void Clan armada disbanded. Many ships pledged allegiance to the reformed Concord. Others returned to the outer systems, carrying word of a new kind of rule, one built not on purity, but on inclusion. Vela took no title, Instead, she became keeper of the Vault of Echoes, tasked with healing the rifts of the past. She and Joran developed an uneasy truce that slowly warmed into mutual respect. She taught him Selenari martial forms. He taught her how to brew coffee, which she declared disgusting but oddly comforting. As for Joran and Zyra, they did not marry in the traditional sense. The Selenari had no ceremony for what they shared. Instead, during the next eclipse convergence, they stood together in the core chamber and wove their essences into a single harmonic chord that echoed through every spire, every home, every heart in Velara. It was not a union of flesh, but of purpose, to lead not as sovereign and consort, but as co-anchors of a civilization learning to breathe again. Years later, children would play in the palace gardens, their skin ranging from moon-pale to sun-kissed bronze, their hair white, black, or streaked with stardust. They'd hear stories of the time the queen was too big, too hot, too alone, until a human with a thick skull and a stubborn heart walked through fire and taught them all that love isn't about matching frequencies, but about creating a new song together. And high above, in a balcony draped with flowering vines that bloomed in impossible colors, Joran would sit with Zyra, her head resting on his shoulder, her heat no longer a warning, but a welcome. The stars watched, the core hummed, and for the first time in centuries, Velara did not merely survive. It lived. The war ended not with a blast, but with a breath. Vela's surrender whispered like a prayer. She stepped onto the palace landing pad, armor gone, eyes raw with remembered love. Zyra met her not as queen, but as sister, arms open, no throne between them. Above, the Void Clan fleet hung silent, then scattered like ash in solar wind. Joran watched from the shadows, shoulder still bandaged, heart full. He'd walked into fire and found not death, but family. In the weeks that followed, the core pulsed bronze, not gold, not silver, but something new. The triad held, queen, exile, human, bound by pain, forged in grace. Vela took no crown. She became keeper of echoes, mending what pride had broken. She and Joran argued over star charts and spice levels in synth tea, then laughed like old friends. Zyra abolished the purity decrees, opened the spires to offworlders, traders, dreamers. Children with mixed blood played beneath twin suns, unafraid of difference. Joran never asked to stay. He simply did because home wasn't a planet, but a presence. At night, he and Zyra walked the highest balcony, fingers entwined, silence sweeter than vows. The core no longer burned. It warmed. It welcomed. It remembered every scar and called it sacred. Years later, when ambassadors asked how peace was won, Zyra would smile. A human dared to care when everyone else feared. Joran would add, and a queen dared to trust when everyone else fled. Their story became law, then legend, then lullaby. No statues were built, no monuments carved, only a single vine-covered bench in the solarium, where two souls often sat, quiet and whole. The stars still turned, the spires still gleamed, but now, laughter echoed where silence once ruled. And in the heart of Velara, too big, too hot, too alive, love finally had room to breathe.